Hi there, welcome to Granny's Maintenance and Woodwork for Women. Today we're covering the circular saw. Okay, there's two types. You can have corded or battery operated. Today we're going to be using the corded variety. Now your circular saws do one thing, they cut a straight line. They don't do curves and don't try to twist them in the saw line to get it to move slightly to one side. It will jump out of that cut line and it can be dangerous, so you don't want to do things like that. It's designed to cut timber. Your boards such as MDF, particle board, timber plywood, etc. And if you want to cut something like hardy plank or laminates, there are different blades for those purposes. It is not that difficult to change a blade, and it's something I could do a video on later on if we need that, so just leave a message in the comments. But anytime you're changing a blade or any time you decide to make an adjustment to your saw, because you can adjust the depth of that cut and you can adjust the angle of that cut. So if you decide to do any of those things, make sure your saw is off and make sure it is not plugged in. Okay, always disconnect for those type of things. Now, one other thing, this saw is not designed to cut metal. Don't even attempt it. Cutting through steel is a hell of a lot harder than timber, so you're going to burn your motor out. And it's also going to shoot sparks. It's not good for it. It's not really designed for that. Okay, we're going to start moving on to components now, and we'll sort of break it down bit by bit. Okay, the components of the saw. You have the motor behind the blade. This is the motor. This is the blade. And here to the right, you'll see we have a guard that goes over that blade. When your saw is running along, as it's running along the timber, it's pushing that guard back, and it will spring back when you're finished cutting. When it's sawing, this is the sole plate here at the bottom. So the blade actually fits through that sole plate. It's a solid plate with a gap for the saw. Now, as it runs, the teeth run anti-clockwise, but as the saw is placed on a surface, a nice stable surface, the blade cuts up, but the sole plate holds the saw down, so it gives a nice even cut. On the sole plate, if you've noticed, it's adjustable. We have an adjustment here. This gives me an angled cut, so if I want to move that, I'm going to release that and I'm going to tilt my saw. It will go up to 45 degrees. Now if I'm going to cut, I'm cutting on an angle. Don't know if you can see that. So that would sit flat and I'd be running along like that. I'm doing a 45-degree cut. Now whenever you make any adjustments, lock them in place so they don't move. Now I'm not using that one now, so I'm going to move it. I also have this little thing here. It's called a rip fence. Now, if I was cutting towards the edge, taking a strip off the timber, I might only want to take off, 1 inch, about 2.5 centimetres. Now the saw blade goes there. I would set my gauge so it's about 2.5 centimetres and I would lock that off. And then as I travel along, this is hanging on to the timber as we slide along, and it's keeping me in a nice straight line. If I'm making a cut that's a good 60 centimetres from the edge, okay, I need to create a new rip fence. But it's not a rip fence as such. I'm going to be using something like a metal ruler, and I'm going to use clamps in place parallel to where I'm going to cut, so that I'm actually guided and I get a nice clean cut. Now I'm going to remove my rip fence, and that's all it looks like. If we turn the saw around the other direction, we have another adjustment. If I release this, I can now drop my sole plate so I have less of the saw exposed. Whoop. It's being very unconventional, this thing. Okay, it's unlocked, loosened off. If I pull my guard back, see how much of the blade is exposed? As opposed to if it was right down flat, have a look how much of the blade is exposed now. Quite a considerable bit more. So the timber I'm going to be cutting today is going to be supported up off the table, so I don't want to cut much deeper than the actual cut. because I don't want to cut through my table. So I'm going to take my rip fence down a fair bit. That should be enough to cover it, and I'm going to lock that in place. Okay, that officially is locked in place, ready to go. Now, for my job, I don't need the rip fence, I don't need the bevel cut, the side-on cut, but I do need the depth adjusted. That's all my adjustments on my saw. So I'm going to sit that there now, ready for the next job. Uses. Okay, if you work in second-hand timber, which I often do, I get timber that's been pulled out of houses, and quite often it's got broken nails and screws in it. They may not always be visible. You need to invest in a metal detector. You need to run it over it and under it. And whatever you do, don't do that over a metal table, or it's going to pick up the table. You'll never be able to work out if there's metal in the timber or if it's the table. So just be aware of that. But a metal detector is worth investing if you're dealing with second-hand timber. You don't want to wreck your blade. They cost a lot to replace. Okay, from here, we're going to start getting our workplace ready. We're going to do some housekeeping. We're going to clear the area. Get rid of all unnecessary tools and make sure it's clear of debris. You want the area around your table to be clear so you're not tripping over unnecessary things that shouldn't be there. Now we're going to start putting on our PPE ready for the task. Saws are some of the noisiest tools you've got in your shed. Okay, now's the time to get yourself some earmuffs. Every now and then, little splinters of timber can shoot off, so make sure you've got eye protection. Okay, other than that, sawdust. Saws create a lot of sawdust and a lot of airborne particles, so you need a dust mask. Some of our timbers are toxic, and not only that, if you're around timber and you're sawing frequently, you're breathing in those sort of particles all the time. You could end up with conditions like emphysema. With enough rubbish going down to your lungs, you can cause problems for yourself. For that reason, you need to wear a mask. And the other thing is we need to make sure we've got no gloves on, no jewellery, and no loose clothing. Nothing that can get caught in that blade. Okay, this is the time that I'm going to check my guard on my blade to make sure it springs back properly so it's working correctly, because it's there for our protection, and any adjustments I need to make to the machine. Like I said, I want to drop the sole plate down, so I'm using less of the blade. I'm going to have my timbers supporting my workpiece because I don't want to cut through the table. Now, if I've got it supported, I don't want my blade all the way down that it cuts my workpiece and my table. I want it just below my workpiece timber. If I think the timber I'm cutting through is less than 1 centimetre, so I'm only going to have it dropped probably 0.5 centimetre to 1 centimetre below that. I don't need it very low because I don't want to cut that table. Okay, our workpiece should be on a firm but level surface, and the table height should be appropriate for your woodwork. If you're working standing up, you want it probably about chest height or just a little bit below that. You want to be comfortable because you're doing it for an indefinite time, and some of the timber and the materials can be a little bit heavy, so you don't want an injured back or anything like that. Now, circular saws are perfect for cutting, like I said, large sheets. So you need a fairly decent sized surface to spread it out on. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark my cut line. And when I mark my cut line, what I'm going to do is if I want to take 30 centimetres off the end of a big sheet, I'm going to mark 30 centimetres at one end, and I'm going to mark it at the other end, and I'm going to use my metal ruler, and I'm going to draw a lovely straight line. And I'm going to draw a line that looks something like that. It's only thin, and I want it like that. It's got to be noticeable, but not too thick. Can you see this line? This is with the texter. It's much easier to see, but do you know your saw blade is 3 millimetre wide? That doesn't sound like much. But when you draw that line, I don't want you to put the saw on that line. If you're doing that, you're cutting off 1.5 millimetre off the side that you have already measured to the line, and 1.5 millimetre off the other side. But that's waste, that's not a problem. I want you to cut on the waist side of that line. I want your blade to be right up against that blade. Can you see that little square? That is my saw. So I'm putting it so the blade is next to that line. So I'm cutting everything on the other side of that line off. Cutting it and having that line tells me it's exactly the right length. 1.5 doesn't sound much, but if you did that at both ends, it's now 3 millimetres. That doesn't sound much, but if you're doing a little cabinet and that's the back of it, the back's going to be too small. It'll be just enough that it's not a nice professional finish. There's just little things like that that do make the difference. Okay, so like I said, a nice thin but dark enough line that you can see, so you can line your saw up, and like I said, put a big cross on the timber you're not using, so you're putting the saw on that side so the blade is up against the line on that side, and then you're going to cut away there. Now, when you're using something like a big sheet, I would always have it supported off the table because I don't want to cut through my table. Now, I'm going to put a support at one end and I'm going to put it at the other end, and I'm also going to put 2 more supports, one on either side of where you're going to cut. When you're cutting, you do not want that board to drop once you've cut. As I said, it will kick back. You don't want those sort of problems. Make sure it's well supported and make sure it's high enough up that you're not going to cut your table. That's why I've adjusted my blade so it's only about 2 centimetres below that plate that it's cutting, because the timber I'm cutting is ply and it's less than a centimetre, and I've allowed another centimetre, and it's still another 2 centimetres before it touches the table, so I know I'm not going to cut my table. So that's why lines come in handy. Oh, when you put a line and have marked it, get yourself a big set square and double check that that is perpendicular. In other words, 90 degrees to the other side, so you've got a lovely rectangle. You don't want something that looks like a parallelogram. You want something up and down, perfectly rectangular. Okay? Okay, I've set my timber up. My saw's adjusted. I am going to clamp my timber down. I don't want it moved. I'm going to be pushing my saw through that. I'm not going to be forcing it. I'm going to go gently through it. I don't want my workpiece moving. So if I clamp it, it's staying put where I left it. Okay, a couple of things I want you to take in consideration. Before you start your machine, I want you to position it at the side. It's got a front handle and a back handle with the trigger. Place it on the side. You never place it in front of you. You do not ever want to have any body part in front of that blade or behind it. They can kick back and they can take off. Doesn't happen often. It'll be just under certain circumstances. So if it's to the side, you don't have a problem. Also, if you're cutting a piece of timber that is too small to clamp down, where you have to use your fingers to hold it down, don't do it. Get another power tool. The circular saw is too big and it's easy enough to grab your fingers if that timber moves. So you don't want to do that. Okay, we're about to start the machine. We've placed it at the side. We've placed the sole plate, the bottom of the saw, that big metal plate. It's resting on the workpiece I'm about to cut. I'm to the left of it, ready to drive it, and I do not want it up close enough that the blade is in contact with the material. At this stage, I have it resting on the sole plate, so it's ready to slide forward, but the blade is not close enough to the timber to start. If I start it and it's up against the timber, it can kick back from that situation. So just start it, let the blade get right up in speed, and then you're off, ready to go. Don't force it forward. You want to go with the machine, and you're going gently until you get to the other end. Or in my case, I had to stop just before the other end because the table is so wide, I had to go around the other side to finish it off. I'll show you how to do that. Because I had to cut in the middle of the board, I've turned it off and I've left the blade in where it was until I've got around the other side. And then when I've gone to start it, I've gone back a bit, so my blade is not in contact with the timber. And I've actually rested the sole plate up against my metal ruler, which is my guide, and I've tilted it up. I've started the saw, waited till it's got up in revs, and I've slowly dropped it down into that groove I've already cut, and then I've continued on until I finish. And when I finish, I'm going to hold it up, let go of the trigger, wait till that blade stops. I'm not putting it down until the blade stops. If I was to put that down, and I have seen it happen, I'm in a rush, I've taken my hand off the trigger, I've put it down on the ground. For as long as that blade's going, that thing's going to run around like a rat. Just don't have your feet anywhere near it. They do. That thing will definitely move for as long as that blade's moving. And it's a little chopper. So just be careful. Okay, one last thing. If you're ever carrying your saw, okay, you finish your workpiece, you take note to another table, or you're carrying it over to your workpiece, make sure your finger is not near the trigger. Hang on to it below the back handle and hang on to the front handle. Don't have your finger near the trigger. It's a bit like a loaded gun. If you've got your finger near the trigger on a loaded gun and you trip, there's every chance it could go off. Same thing could happen with a saw, and you could have a saw that's suddenly going flat strap in midair. Okay, I'm setting up my workpiece. I've got a big piece of ply I'm cutting. I've got a piece of timber up under that end, another timber under that end. I've started writing my line. Got a fine point marker. Now, where did I put my marks? Oh, I did measure that and I forgot about it. So you'll have to forgive me. I'm just making up a line. I'm marking where I want to cut. Okay. A nice, dark, fine line. Now, I'm going to place a piece of timber under each side of that line. So I need one there, and I need one there. So that's well supported. I'm also going to clamp that timber down so it cannot move. So a couple of big clamps. As I'm going from here to there, I'm going to clamp on that side. That's not going to move away. Now, the other thing I need to do is I have my mark where I'm going to cut. I'm going to get my saw. Right. I'm going to work out how far that blade is from there. I'm being approximate today, just so I can show you what we're doing. Okay. Okay, so I'm being a bit naughty. I should mark that at both ends. Okay, it should be fairly close. Okay, now what I'm doing is clamping my ruler. That line that I've just made tells me, whoop, it's not supposed to do that. Okay, this is going to be my guide. I'm going to run my saw along that so it stays straight and I get a lovely straight line. And by rights, I should have it the exact location at both ends so I don't veer off my drawn line. Actually, I know what I've got. Clamp from the bottom. Otherwise, these can interfere with your saw. Okay. I don't want that moving out. It's still following my line. Okay, that line shouldn't move. Okay, I'm going to put my PP on ready. I've got glasses, so I'm not going to add another set of glasses. I'm placing my mask over my earmuffs. And then I'm ready to connect my saw. I've adjusted the height before, so that's not going to cut my table. Oops. I'm just going to disconnect that. I change the height. Okay. Okay. Plugging in, turning it on. I'm ready to go. I'm just going to put the power cord over here so it's not crossing over at all. I'm going to rest up against my guide, and I'm over too far, but let's go from here. So it's just sitting on the edge, my blade's not in contact, and off we go. As you can see, I haven't cut all the way through, but I let my saw stop before I lifted it up. Now, I'm going to pretend that I've finished it. When I'm finished with my saw, I'm going to hold it up until the motor stops. See how long it spins for? And then I'm going to place it on its back. That's protecting it. And then I'm going to turn it off with the power, so there's no chance I can be hurt.